The Legend of Brendan the Navigator, unraveling the mystery of Saint Brendan's voyage. Hey everyone, and welcome back to Canadian Chronicles, the channel where we bring the past to life, one story at a time. Today we're delving into a truly extraordinary tale, the life and legendary voyage of Brendan the Explorer, or Saint Brendan of Clonfert. This Irish monk, known for his incredible journey across the seas, has captured the imaginations of countless people throughout history. His story blends the mystical with the historical, leaving us with more questions than answers. Part 1. The life of Saint Brendan, a monk, a missionary, and a visionary. To truly understand the legend of Brendan, we need to start with the man himself. Saint Brendan of Clonfert was born in Ireland some 20 years after St. Patrick passed in 461 AD. Tradition holds he was born on May 16th in 484 AD on the Fennet Peninsula, near the city of Tralee in County Kerry. His early life was steeped in Christian religious and Celtic cultural traditions of the time. He was raised in a Christian society that was beginning to take root in Ireland after the spread of Christianity. He grew up in a time when Ireland was transitioning from Druidic traditions to Christianity, and this transformative period made him a part of Ireland's first generation of Christians. He was baptized by St. Eric, a local bishop, who later became his guardian and mentor. At the age of 6, Brendan was sent to further his Christian education with St. Ida, who was also known as Bridget of Munster. St. Ida was one of the most significant figures in early Christianity. When Brendan was young, he decided he wanted to spend his life traveling around Ireland to all the monastic communities, collecting their views on the rules for life. Eventually, he was ordained as a priest by St. Eric at the age of 26. At his ordination, the gospel reading was about giving up all for Christ. It was after this sermon there grew up in his heart a great desire to leave his land and his country, and he requested earnestly of the Lord that he would grant him some secret country far removed from all men. From this point forward, Brendan started looking for this secret country, and he moved his ministry in Ireland towards the edge of the island by the sea. Brendan continued his education across Ireland, studying under various monastic teachers. Through their teachings, he was exposed to the rich legacy of Irish oral tradition, which included stories of seafaring expeditions, which would later contribute to his embarking on missionary voyages to Scotland, Wales, and Brittany and France. He became a monk sometime around 512 AD and founded several monasteries, the most famous of which is Clonfert Abbey in County Galway. As an abbot, he earned the reputation for being a wise, holy leader, known for his dedication to the Christian faith and to the monastic lifestyle. Brendan's piety, combined with his traveling passion, motivated him to embark on a spiritual journey beyond the known world. The spiritual quest is known as a peregrinatio, which was meant to mirror Christ's suffering of 40 days in the desert. Brendan's story as an explorer to Canada begins with his desire to undertake a pilgrimage motivated by the mysterious ramblings of three enigmatic characters. Brendan's pilgrimage was unlike any other because he wanted to go beyond the known world. According to various historical accounts and legends, Brendan sought to discover the land of promise of the Saints, a mythical land believed to be a paradise of eternal happiness and peace. Part 2. A vision of the Isle of the Blessed, the enigmatic influencers. With a desire in his heart to be granted a secret country far removed from all men, Saint Brendan was most interested when he came into contact with an adventurer named Baranthus. Saint Baranthus was an enigmatic figure who became a spiritual advisor to Brendan. The story goes that Baranthus had left Ireland, traveling west to visit and encourage monastic brethren living in isolated islands far away across the sea. The islands he visited could possibly be as far away as Greenland. After sharing the good conditions of the monks, Baranthus brought up a second, unexpected leg of his journey. It featured an encounter with the land of promise of the saints. Brendan was enthralled by the tale of travel. It was exactly what he was dreaming of. As if by fortune, Brendan met another saint who encouraged his vision of a secret land far away from Ireland. Mairneach was an acquaintance of Baranthus who had traveled and lived in solitary on one of the islands Baranthus journeyed to. Mairneach and Baranthus had joined together to travel further west to the fabled land of the promise of the saints. Both men shared their story that when the boat touched the shore, they landed, walked around the island for 15 days, yet could not reach the limits thereof. No plant saw we without its flower, no tree without its fruit, and all stones thereon were precious gems. In their explorations they discovered an impassable river, where a man appeared emanating a great light. He kindly informed them that they must return home. After resting for a while, the man accompanied them to the shore where the boat was moored, and they set out on their journey to return back to Ireland. The story also briefly mentions another enigmatic figure named Saint Finbar. There are numerous people in Ireland's history named Finbar at that time, but none of the historical records match the time of Brendan. The earliest dates for a recorded Finbar match roughly the time when Brendan returned from his journey, so he can't be the one who told Brendan of far-off lands before he started his journey. Perhaps Finbar is one of the monks encountered along the journey who was living on one of the islands Brendan and his colleagues visited in their travels. It's not possible to know without the discovery of new manuscripts providing concrete evidence for who the mysterious Finbar was. Brendan was enthusiastic about his fellow brethren's tales of adventure and exploration. Brendan was not just a man of prayer, he was also a man of action and adventure. He decided now was the time for him to abandon his life for the spiritual pilgrimage that was in his heart, and set sail towards the heaven that awaited him. He set about gathering resources and finding like-minded pilgrims to accompany him on his journey. Part 3. The Voyage of Saint Brendan, a journey across the seas. Now, let's talk about what makes Brendan's story so extraordinary, the journey itself. The details of Brendan's voyage come from a medieval Latin manuscript called Navigator Sancti Brendani Abaci, or, if you don't care to learn Latin, the Voyage of St. Brendan. The manuscript was not written by Brendan. It was written several hundred years after he passed away, most likely by monks, given that they were the only ones writing in that language. This doesn't necessarily mean the works are spurious. It could be that some of the tales were written earlier but not compiled into book form until much later. We also need to be aware that additions were most likely included. Perhaps observations were added, embellishments were added, and it may be possible that later mariners' journeys were included but attributed to Brendan. Today, hundreds of copies of the tale exist, but they vary widely on the contents included in the stories. This fact makes it a challenge to determine what is actually factual and what is embellishment. The story begins with Saint Brendan completing 3 tasks before setting sail to go west. The first task was to gather like-minded monks who wanted to join him in his pilgrimage. Some versions of the tale tell us there were up to 60 fellow travelers, and other versions tell us there were 20. Given the type of boat that was said to have been used by the mariners, we're going to conclude that the number was 20. Originally, there were 17 monks, but just as they were leaving, 3 more monks begged to join. One of the monks was of particular interest because Brendan was said to have foretold his death as he boarded the ship. The story of how he died is strange to say the least, with a tale of his demise involving rats as large as cats. The core of the story of the death of the monk might be true, but the embellishment of the story seems to have been more allegorical, with the message intended to teach spiritual lessons to the faithful. With the group of monks confirmed, the second task was for the team to set out building a curragh. A curragh is a type of medieval Irish boat with a frame made of wood and the outer sheathing made of animal skin. In this case, the animal skin was from an ox. It has been suggested that Brendan was familiar with this type of boat as he had used it on his missionary journeys to Scotland, Wales, and Brittany. The third task was to load up the boat with sufficient provisions for them on their pilgrimage. A curragh can be quite large, but 20 monks and 40 days of provisions would not leave a lot of room for anything other than patience and tolerance of others. The tale tells us that the monks rowed the boat for some of the time, which means that they had oars, and there's a good chance that the boat had a sail to catch the winds. From the narrative of the story, as well as a successful modern expedition sailing in a curragh from Ireland to Canada, it's possible that Brendan's pilgrims were able to complete their spiritual journey. The journey itself consisted of island hopping. The suggested route is based on descriptions provided in the narrative of the story. The first stop from Northern Ireland could have been St. Kilda Island, northwest of their starting point at a distance of 300 kilometers. This suggestion is based on Brendan's description of a cove which may match closely to the island's formation. The next hop point in the pilgrimage may have been St. Faro Islands at a distance of 450 kilometers. The tale describes an island covered with sheep and birds, which it calls the paradise of the birds. The Faroe Islands are known today as a migration stop for birds traversing the northern Atlantic. Also, the sheep have been known to exist on the island since around the time of Brendan, and they are a unique breed. It is possible that travelers earlier than Brendan brought their sheep to the island. From what we read and what we know today, it seems plausible that Brendan was describing a real place. The next island the adventurers write about is called the Island of the Smiths, some 550 kilometers to the west. The tale describes a place as foreboding and fiery. As monks watched, the island became molten before their eyes. The blacksmiths and other demons hurled molten metal and flaming, foul-smelling rocks at the approaching travelers. The terrifying heat and aggression of the demons made the monks flee quickly. Brendan thought this was a depiction of hell, and I wonder if the scene influenced our modern popular concept of hell. Iceland may be challenging, but it certainly isn't hell. It does meet the description of the Island of the Smiths as it has a long history of volcanic activity. The monks had never seen such things in Ireland, and their fear motivated them to move on quickly to their next island stop. They continued on their journey west, where they crossed what we call today the Irminger Sea, which is roughly 850 kilometers wide. The sea is known today as a route for icebergs to move from north to south, and this may be the source of the tale of the mysterious crystal pillar. Saint Brendan and his crew encountered a massive, glittering, translucent crystal pillar rising from the ocean, stretching towards the heavens. The monks approached the pillar with reverence, but were unable to fully comprehend its purpose or origins. Its sheer size, radiant appearance, and otherworldly qualities make it a prominent feature in their journey. The pillar is described as being enormous, reaching both deep into the sea and high into the sky, giving it an unearthly, awe-inspiring presence. Its material is often depicted as clear and smooth like crystal or glass, yet impossibly strong. The surface of the pillar is polished and shimmering, reflecting light in dazzling patterns. It is sometimes surrounded by powerful currents or luminous waters, adding to its mystique. The Crystal Pillar story is part of the broader genre of Irish Imram stories called voyage tales, which blend Christian allegory with elements of Celtic mythology. The crystal structure is often interpreted as a metaphor for divine majesty or the mysteries of the heavens. Continuing on their journey, they approached a new island. The only location the travelers could have seen west of Iceland is Greenland. From the episode called The Island of the Giant Sea Creature, they encountered the second mysterious tale, which involves a creature referred to as Gisconius. This tale might be an amalgamation of two tales in that Greenland has glacial cavitation and they could have encountered a whale in the open sea. En route to Greenland from the iceberg encounter, they could have found a whale resting on the top of the water. Perhaps they tried to stand on it and the whale responded by diving. After crossing the iceberg seas, the crew grows weary and seeks a place to rest and celebrate Easter. Miraculously, they come upon a seemingly uninhabited island, lush and expansive. The monks eagerly disembark, light a fire to cook their meal and prepare for their prayers. As they gather around the fire, the ground beneath them begins to shift and tremble. The monks soon realize to their horror that the island is no island at all. It is the back of a massive sea creature known as Gisconius, a whale of unimaginable size. The heat of the fire has awakened the creature, which suddenly begins to move, plunging the monks into chaos. A couple of things don't make sense about this story. A whale is not sufficiently large and expansive for 20 monks to stand on it, let alone make a fire on it. Could it be that they both encountered a whale at sea and experienced glacial cavitation while on shore? Ice breaking away from glaciers causes the ground to shake, and the ice does disappear beneath the sea. Some parts of the two experiences are sufficiently close to consolidate them into a single tale. Of course, Brendan, the hero, remains calm because he knew that this was a whale the whole time. Through his faith and quick thinking, he urges his companions to return to their boat, assuring them that God will protect them. The monks manage to escape just as the creature dives to the depths of the ocean, extinguishing the flames. Watching the enormous beast disappear, the monks offer prayers of gratitude for their survival. The Whale Island episode has captured imaginations for centuries, inspiring medieval artists, writers, and explorers. From Greenland, the pilgrims continue west, and the tale states that the temperature begins to warm. In the Island of the Monstrous Beasts episode, they encounter an inhospitable coast with thick fog and creatures with tusks and speckled bellies which were unfriendly to visitors. It's not hard to guess what these creatures are. They are walruses. What's curious is the type of walrus they are. The coast of Labrador, Newfoundland, and Quebec in Canada matches both the physical description of what they thought was an island, and the Atlantic walrus matches Brendan's description of the animal. The Atlantic walrus is extinct in Canada due to European hunters harvesting their oil and tusks, but they used to exist on the Canadian east coast from Newfoundland to the St. Lawrence Seaway. Brendan's description of the monstrous mean beasts is accurate for its time, giving us confidence of both the story and its location. For the next stop, the story tells us that Brendan and the monks headed south to a warmer climate. After some 2,500 kilometers, they would have reached the location of the tale of the Island of the Grapes in either Quebec or Nova Scotia, Canada. Neither Quebec nor Nova Scotia is an island, but this fact would not have been known for more than 1,000 years. Both provinces do grow grapes though, which the pilgrims tell of in their tales. If Brendan would have just followed the coastline, he would have ended up in Quebec. But if he chose to traverse the Gulf of St. Lawrence to the island of Newfoundland, he would have eventually reached Nova Scotia, which is significantly further south and warmer. If he took the Newfoundland route, the pilgrims would have passed by the exact location of L'Anse-aux-Meadows, where several hundred years later the Vikings would have built the first known European settlement in North America. The narrative for the Island of the Grapes location describes it as a lush island covered with wild vineyards and offering an abundance of sweet grapes. The travelers find nourishment and joy here, a sharp contrast to the harsher islands they've encountered. To them, it symbolizes God's provision and the fruits of faithfulness. The final goal in the Voyage of Saint Brendan epic is of course the pilgrims reaching what they perceive to be the promised land of the saints told to them by Berinthus, Marnoch, and Finbar. After 7 years of wandering at sea, Brendan and his companions finally complete their spiritual pilgrimage. The island is described as a verdant paradise. It was a place of perpetual spring where the air was fragrant, the rivers sparkled with crystal clear water, and the trees bore fruit in abundance. This land was free from suffering and decay, embodying the ultimate reward for the faithful. This sounds like Canada to me, but the narrative suggests that it may be much farther south. The idea of perpetual spring might indicate that the pilgrims remained in a southern location for sufficient time to know that there was little change in seasons. This could have been any one of numerous locations down the east coast of North America, all the way down to some tropical locations. The description includes being attacked by dark-skinned natives, clean and clear ocean water, and a sluggish sea, perhaps caused by large masses of seaweed. This could suggest a location as far south as the Caribbean, but we will never be able to find the place. The description reminds us of a typical treasure map scenario where the objective is wealth or paradise, which are never realized. Perhaps these ideas influenced later stories of treasure locations. Brendan and his crew spent 40 days exploring the paradise, marveling at its beauty and experiencing divine revelations. However, Brendan and the monks were told by a heavenly messenger that this land was not theirs to inhabit permanently. Reluctantly, they set out on a 7-year journey to return to the country of Ireland to share their tales. The other stories from the Voyage of Saint Brendan are equally as much fun and warrant an effort to research and read. They serve to record the details of what was seen, venerate the saint, and teach spiritual lessons through the combination of experience and allegory. Part 4. The Myth and Reality. Understanding and interpreting the stories. Here's the big question. How much of the story of Brendan's journey is real, and how much is myth? Historians have long debated whether Brendan and his monks really sailed as far as the Isle of the Blessed, or whether the voyage was purely symbolic. It's clear when you read the stories that the narrative is a mix of religious allegory and Celtic seafaring adventures. The stories have numerous mysterious creatures, otherworldly landscapes, and miraculous events. One of the versions of the Voyage of Brendan is about mice as big as cats. The story has become known as the Rat Isle, but unfortunately this particular story hasn't been translated from Latin into English. Let's examine what we can of the rats as big as cats story and try to separate possible facts from fiction. I mentioned earlier that just when Brendan was about to set sail, 3 monks begged him to be able to join his crew. One of those men is referred to as a jester in this story, but not a court jester like you would see in a deck of cards. Rather, the story suggests that the man is more of a pretender and a manipulator. He says, "Take me with thee for God's sake. Pity my wretchedness, that I may go with thee. From his words, we get the impression that this jester is running from something, or perhaps his wretchedness refers to a disease. He appears to be desperate to get on the boat to escape whomever or whatever is pursuing him. In my imagination, I see a farmer running up the road with a pitchfork in hand, angrily pursuing the jester for the dishonor he met on his daughter. In the story, Brendan is told by heaven the man is a fraud. But in reality, I would guess that everyone on the boat knew what he was about. Cloisters are pretty tight-knit communities, and like a typical small town, everyone knows everything about everyone else. Brendan tells him that he's going to die on this journey. Instead of being prophetic, this might just be a good guess because Brendan has seen numerous long missionary journeys, and he's observed what type of people can make it and what type of people can't. Undeterred, the jester joins the pilgrimage. I think a key point about this monk to note is that the man lives at the edges of his religion rather than being fully committed. The feel I get from this character is like a person living their life in their passions, but then turning to God on their deathbed. After all 20 monks are on the boat, they set out to sea on their journey, and eventually they come to an island. As they approach the edge of the island, they see giant, furry, hideous mice as big as cats on the beach at the water's edge. In my mind's eye, I can see the mice scurrying up and down the beach, dipping into the water aggressively, trying to get to the boat and the men. The brethren ask Brendan, "What do yonder mice want?" And Brendan's response is, "Their desire is to eat and devour us." Picture this surreal image in your mind. You've got a boat of 20 monks a few feet offshore with innumerable giant aggressive mice trying to devour them. At this point in the story, Brendan turns to the jester and says to him, "Arise, take the body of Christ and depart for the eternal life, for I hear the song of angels calling thee to them." The idea here is that Brendan is telling the jester to take his last rites because Brendan gets the feeling that he's about to die. This is pretty unusual, and the jester's response is equally unusual. The jester rejoiced at the saying. Wait, what? He was happy that he was going to die? What did he actually do back on dry land that he's so eager to die? In his response he says, "Ah, Lord, what have I done that I should be taken to heaven so speedily?" Brendan offers communion to the jester, which he receives as last rites, and then he lays down in the boat and dies. The narrator of the story tells us that the jester is carried up into paradise by 9 orders of angels. In finality, the brethren throw the jester's body on the shore, and the mice devour it. It's clear that parts of this story could be true, and other parts are embellished. We know for a fact that Saint Brendan was a real person, and it is plausible that a devious monk wanted to join him on his pilgrimage for some reason. Many people believe that the journey Brendan embarked on is literal too, and there are plenty of islands on the supposed path that the brethren followed. It might even be possible that rats from previous mariners were living on the island, but I doubt that they were big as cats, and we know that the narrators of tales frequently embellish the skills and deeds of the hero. I'm also skeptical that the monk was quite so eager to die, and the way he died is questionable as well. I think we can conclude that this story is more like a historical novella than a factual history. What then is the point of it? To start with, we need to understand that the majority of people were not literate in the 5th century AD. Religious teachers would convey their teachings through memorable stories and pictures which would help people remember the point they were trying to teach. I think that is why this story was recorded and embellished. I suggest that these could be symbolic of the bad human passions that if we give ourselves to them, they will destroy our lives. In the case of the jester, it appears that he was the type of monk who let his passions run his life. This man is contrasted to Saint Brendan, the hero, who was notably dedicated to his piety and religious fervor. I would also suggest that the jester was escaping some dire fate when he begged, "For God's sake, let me on your boat." He may have left behind his fate, but his personal rats came with him. Somewhere along the journey, his rats got him into trouble again, but this time his activities were terminal with no escape. Or perhaps the rats were a disease the jester picked up due to his behavior. Perhaps the disease slowly killed him while he was on the journey. In both cases, I suggest that Brendan administered last rites just before the jester died because he could see the end was near. The religious interpretation is that your lusts and vices will lead you to a bad end, whether through the judgment of people or disease caused by a bad lifestyle. And because your rats are within you, you can't escape them by running to a far-off land. I see Saint Brendan standing on the bow of the boat, preaching to the brethren. You must redirect your passion from lust and vice to the work of good. The theological interpretation is that even though you're a bad person in life, giving yourself over to lust and vice, you can still get into paradise if you have a sincere conversion just before the end. This issue has been a question throughout time. How and why can you get into paradise at the last minute while I live a pious life throughout? The idea that 9 orders of angels took the jester to heaven seems to mean that he went out with blazing glory, which I'm sure angers many religious people. The rat aisle episode is a memorable teaching tool used to convey the message that parishioners should focus their passions away from harm towards good, and that even though they are not perfect in their lives, they can still get into paradise. Part 5. Brendan in Canada. Possible connections to North America. So, how does this all relate to Canada? Could Saint Brendan have actually reached the shores of Canada? But the idea that Brendan may have sailed across the Atlantic to parts of Newfoundland or even further into what is now Canada is an intriguing possibility. We'll start with the Faroe Islands, which is the second stop of Brendan and his pilgrims in the Paradise of Birds episode. The migratory path for birds is natural, but the presence of sheep with no attendants is not. Sheep getting to the island would have required people to take them there. Archaeological research in the Faroe Islands has found and dated ash from burning and from grain seeds to dates from around 400 AD, which is a century before Brendan arrived. This would suggest that people were traveling to and from and living on the islands for some time before the voyage. Either the population left or died out. Monks were celibate, so there is no way for generations of people to maintain the sheep. The presence of sheep indicates human habitation at an early date, and it implies that the boats would have been used to transport the sheep from the northern part of the United Kingdom to the Faroe Islands. A very interesting find in Northern Ireland was discovered in 1896, which supports the idea of early ocean travel. The find is called the Broider Hoard, and it contains 4 objects wrought in gold: an intricate necklace, an elaborate torque, a simple bowl, and a boat with oars and a sail mast. The hoard, including the boat, has been dated to 100 BC. This date is pre-Picts and pre-Roman, which makes it essentially the Mid-Iron Age. This date proves that seagoing travel was being done roughly 600 years before Brendan. The Broider boat appears rounder than the carrack used by Brendan, but 600 years of innovation could have produced a better seafaring vessel. Of interest to Brendan's tale is the Broider boat was found in Ireland, a 6-hour drive from County Kerry, which is Brendan's birthplace and where he was thought to have started his voyage. Boats with sails and oars are proven to exist in Brendan's time, but there is no evidence from the time period of journeys across the North Atlantic in a carrack. That is until 1977, when an adventurous mariner named Tim Severin successfully traveled from Ireland to Newfoundland in the replica of a carrack. Severin left County Kerry on May 17, 1976 and traveled over 7,000 kilometers in 13 months to prove that it was possible to traverse the North Atlantic Ocean in a 6th century boat. He had some modern communications equipment on the boat, but for the most part, he attempted to use the same techniques to travel as Brendan was thought to use. Essentially, use of the sun's location by day and the location of the stars by night, as well as their relationship to the horizon, including ancient knowledge of the location of celestial bodies, would have been the method that Brendan used. This raises the question, what type of navigational tools could be used in determining these celestial relationships? The modern sextant was not invented until the 19th century, but the astrolabe was in use since 225 BC. A new theory has been proposed about another tool used in navigation that could be similar in function to the astrolabe. A theory has been suggested which describes the Celtic cross as a navigational tool that could have been used like an astrolabe. The image of a Celtic cross, which is a Christian cross with a circular depiction at the joint of the cross, is very similar to both an astrolabe and a sextant. Essentially, the horizontal arm could be used to line up with the celestial body, and the vertical arm could rotate to read markings on the circle at the joint of the arms. Much like an astrolabe, this tool could have been used to tell directions on land and sea and help keep time and calendar dates. All of these measurements would have been necessary for the group of spiritual pilgrims to make it to their promised land. The evidence for this theory is not without its opponents, but it's worth considering that Brendan could have used both an astrolabe and a Celtic cross as tools to cross the sea. One final evidence for people from Brendan's time reaching North America is the discovery of Ogham runes in several locations in North America. Ogham was an early Irish script in use at Brendan's time which died out about 100 or so years after his journey. It consists of linear markings, which have been called sticks of various lengths and spacings, which are clearly inscribed into stone by people. One site in West Virginia has a message deciphered to pronounce a Christmas blessing. Along with this Christmas message, there are other Christian symbols in common use for the Ogham time period. This is evidence, written in stone, that some monks visited North America and inscribed a message in stone in a language that was alive in Brendan's day. We can't say that Brendan did it, but we can say that successful navigation to North America happened during or shortly after Brendan completed his voyage. All the evidence cited above is at best circumstantial in the case for Brendan visiting Canada. There is no way to prove conclusively that Brendan successfully transversed the North Atlantic to stand on the shores of Canada. The detractors from the Saint Brendan theory will wag their fingers and write rebuttals. I choose to believe that Brendan did succeed in his pilgrimage to his promised land, and that he is one of the earliest European people to set foot on Canadian soil. From the description of the islands he visited being sufficiently close to what we know today of locations along his most likely route to the successful voyage in modern times between County Kerry and Newfoundland, I have sufficient support for my opinion. The Ogham runes with a Christian message give us a time frame and a message unique to Ireland at the correct time in history. The Celtic cross navigational tool is a fun idea, but even without it, the Romans and Christianity would have brought knowledge and tools for Brendan to use that would have contributed to a successful voyage. We are never going to find a rock with Brendan's name on it which proves conclusively that he completed his voyage, so I think this evidence is sufficient to support his success. There can be no doubt that the Voyage of Saint Brendan had influence on European exploration efforts and folklore. The context of Brendan's story is in a period of time when the Romans had just left the islands that now make up the United Kingdom. Culturally, the transition would have been from Roman-influenced Druidic culture into an early Pictish culture. The language was in transition too, from spoken Celtic with Latin influences, but no written language, to written Ogham runic symbols. This was a time when people still thought the world was flat, and by traveling to the edges like Brendan did, you would fall off into oblivion. Objects like crosses, golden torques, carvings, paintings, and golden necklaces were more than just status symbols. They had meaning and were used to convey messages and stories. Travel was slow on land and on the sea. Brendan and his team would have expected their journey to take many years, and they would have expected to never return to their homeland. For their time, these men were legends, and their deeds would have influenced people in their time and in future generations. One possible early influence on exploring mariners relates to legendary Norse figures like Eric the Red, Thorfinn Karlsefni, and Leif Erikson. The fact that they set out for a land in the west could have been influenced by stories they heard which made them aware of Brendan's voyage. In the saga of Eric the Red, it is written of Greenland that, before the land was settled by Norsemen, there were Christian people there, whom the Norsemen called Papar, but they later went away because they did not wish to live among heathens. And they left behind them Irish books, bells, and croziers, from which it could be understood that they were Irishmen. This proves that Eric had contact with Irish monks who would have known Brendan's tale, and they may have heard the story of the voyage from the monks due to its popularity. One concrete piece of evidence of Brendan's long-lasting influence related to seafaring is the inclusion of the names of some of the locations he visited on maps of the North Atlantic created hundreds of years later. It has been suggested that Christopher Columbus would have seen the locations on his maps and that he may have read the tales of Brendan's voyage as well. For example, the 13th century Mappa Mundi has Brendan's Isle depicted on it, and an early 14th century mariner's map called the Hereford Chart places the land of the Promise of the Saints near the Canary Islands, calling it the Fortunate Isles. Mariners reviewing and using various medieval charts would have read the stories like they were facts because they were heading out over the sea into the unknown and may fall off the edge of the world. Any hints about what lay ahead of them would help them avoid calamity. In literature, Brendan's story follows the trajectory of the hero's journey long before the cycle was proposed. This method is a time-honored process to tell a tale that will engage and enrich readers' hearts and minds. The Voyage of St. Brendan as a literary work became hugely popular in medieval Europe. It was translated into multiple languages and circulated widely across the Christian world. The Voyage of Maldwyn was a popular early 2nd millennium romantic literature piece clearly influenced by Brendan's tale. It reads like the drama of a Greek tragedy, with violence, intrigue, betrayal set in the Ireland of the time. Modern writers like J.R.R. Tolkien confess to have been influenced by Brendan's tale. Parts of his famous Lord of the Rings series do homage to Brendan's voyage. He also wrote a poem which we'll end with in a few minutes. C.S. Lewis, another English Christian writer, wrote a book called The Voyage of the Dawn Treader that was inspired by the story of Brendan. In the musical arts, the album The Brendan Voyage was written by Sean Davey for Irish bagpipes and orchestra and was released in 1980. It is performed in a style and with instruments that are unique to the Irish culture. The Irish band Iona released an album entitled Beyond These Shores in 1993. The album is a mix of haunting, melancholy, and upbeat songs that attempt to capture the emotion of the voyage. The album follows the voyage chronologically, and all the tracks have hints of Brendan's voyage in the names. In the visual arts, there are numerous ancient and modern portraits depicting Brendan alone, and many more paintings and engravings depicting him and the pilgrims in a boat on the sea. Stained glass windows can be found with portraits of the saint. Sculptures in stone and bronze can be found throughout Ireland as well. In the culinary arts, the tales of miraculous food provisions during the voyage has given us Saint Brendan's Irish cream salted caramel liqueur, named in his honor. As you've heard, the tale of Saint Brendan's voyage has inspired artists of different types of media to create interesting works in memory of his contribution to culture. The idea of heroic men sailing to distant lands became a powerful symbol of the spirit of discovery and religious zeal. Would you agree that a 12-foot-tall bronze statue of you overlooking the sea in a place where you were born and buried is sufficient to prove that what you accomplished with your life is appreciated? Can you imagine what it would feel like if 1600 years after you were born, a 12-foot bronze statue was erected in commemoration of the deeds of your life? This happened for Saint Brendan in 2004 because he is considered to be one of Ireland's patron saints. His life work as a missionary and founder of monasteries was highly regarded. The Catholic Church canonized Brendan to Saint Brendan possibly in 1284. His influence today on Irish Catholicism can't be overstated. He continues to be a very popular saint. His legacy as a saint in the Catholic Church is celebrated on May 16th each year. His religious good deeds, combined with his adventurous boldness in venturing far beyond the known world in search of something greater than himself, have sealed his place in history. Regardless of whether we think his tale is fact or fiction, the legend of Saint Brendan the Navigator remains a powerful symbol of adventure, faith, and a quest for knowledge. I want to leave you with the first stanza of a poem, The Death of Saint Brendan, written by J.R.R. Tolkien. At last, out of the deep seas he passed, and mist rolled on the shore. Under clouded moon the waves were loud, as the laden ship him bore. To Ireland, back to wood and mire, to the tower tall and grey, where the knell of Clonfert bell told the green Galloway. Where Shannon down to Loch Derg ran, under a rain-clad sky, Saint Brendan came to his journey's end, to await his hour to die. Conclusion. Saint Brendan's story remains one of the most captivating in the history of exploration. His voyage across the seas seeking the Isle of the Blessed may have never been fully documented, but it has inspired generations of adventurers and explorers. The possibility that Brendan, an Irish monk in the 6th century, may have reached the shores of Canada adds an intriguing chapter to the history of North American exploration. So, what do you think? Did Brendan really sail across the Atlantic to discover new lands, or is his journey just a myth? I've given you my opinion, so let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoy this deep dive into the life of Saint Brendan, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more incredible stories from the Canadian past. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and we'll see you in the next episode of Canadian Chronicles.